You know, when we think of scary stories, we usually think of monsters hiding under the bed, or maybe ghosts rattling around in an attic. But Edgar Allan Poe? He was fascinated by something way, way more terrifying. He was interested in the darkness that can hide inside the human mind itself. We're about to explore the life and work of a true master of mystery and the macabre.
This right here, this is the question that just haunts almost every single one of his stories. It's about what happens when our own thoughts, our own guilt, our own obsessions become the real monsters. So I want you to keep that question right in the front of your mind as we step into his world.
So to really get where these dark ideas came from, we've got to look at Poe's own life. And, well, it was a life that was shaped by tragedy right from the very beginning. His story isn't just about some famous writer, it's really about a survivor.
I mean, just look at the instability here. Before he was even 3 years old, both of his parents were gone. He was taken in by the Allan family, but he was never actually formally adopted. And that created this constant tension, especially when it came to money. He gets into a great school, the University of Virginia, but his foster father basically refused to pay for it, so he had to leave. He was so desperate for some kind of structure in his life that he even joined the army.
And you have to understand, this chaos wasn't just some sad backstory. No, it became the actual raw material for his art. That feeling of being an outsider, that deep, deep sense of loss, the search for a place to belong. You can feel all of that churning just beneath the surface of his poems and his stories. So how does a person build a career out of all this? Well, with no family money to fall back on, Poe had to make this incredibly bold and really difficult choice for the time. He decided he was going to be one of America's very first professional writers, trying to make a living using only his pen. And let me tell you, it was a constant battle. He was a brilliant but pretty harsh literary critic, which you could imagine made him a few enemies. He bounced from one magazine editing job to another, always struggling to make ends meet. He actually started writing short stories simply because they paid better than poetry. And he made a name for himself, fast. In fact, one of his first horror stories, Baroness, was so shocking that the magazine got tons of complaints from horrified readers. He was pushing the boundaries from day one.
But Poe was so much more than just a writer of scary stories. He was an inventor. You could even call him an architect of entire new ways of telling tales that we still use today.
Okay, think about this for a second. Before Poe, the detective story, as we know it, it didn't really exist. He's the one who created the formula, a super brilliant, kind of eccentric detective who solves a baffling crime using pure logic. Sound familiar? He's also seen as one of the architects of the modern short story, but his biggest innovation was definitely in horror. This quote, this gets to the absolute heart of his genius. For Poe, the most terrifying thing wasn't some creature lurking in the shadows. Nope, it was the potential for darkness that exists inside every single one of us. He wanted to explore what happens when a person's guilt, or their fear, or their obsession completely takes over and drives them to do terrible, terrible things. And this is what we call psychological horror. All the drama, all the suspense, the terror, it all comes from inside the character's head. The story becomes this journey into a really troubled mind, and he makes sure that we, the readers, are trapped right in there with them.
So you'd think with all this genius he'd be successful, right? Well, despite his growing fame, financial success was just always out of reach. For his most famous poem, The Raven, the one that made him a household name practically overnight, he was paid about $15. Just 15. It really shows you what a difficult path he was on.
Okay, so now let's talk about one of Poe's most powerful tools for creating that psychological horror. It all comes down to a really simple question. Who is telling us the story?
Poe forces us, as readers, to ask this really critical question. When you read one of his stories, you have to become a detective yourself. You're constantly trying to figure out if the person guiding you through the events is actually telling you the whole truth.
Think about it like this. A normal narrator in a story is someone we just kind of trust to give us the facts. But Poe, he created something totally different, the unreliable narrator. This is a character who might start the story by insisting, "I'm not mad, I am perfectly calm and logical." But as they describe what they did and what they were thinking, you, the reader, start to see the cracks. You realize their version of reality is completely warped by their own guilt or obsession or madness. It's a brilliant technique that puts you right inside their paranoia.
Poe's entire life was defined by tragedy and mystery, and in a fitting, kind of dark twist, so was his death.
his final years were marked by even greater sorrow.
He had married his young cousin Virginia, and when she died from tuberculosis at just 24 years old, it absolutely devastated him. People who knew him said he never, ever truly recovered. His lifelong struggles with depression just got worse, and it cast this dark shadow over his final years.
And that brings us to his very last unsolved story. He was supposed to be traveling from Richmond to Philadelphia, but he just disappeared for 5 days. He was eventually found on a street in Baltimore, totally delirious and wearing clothes that weren't even his. He was taken to a hospital, and he died 4 days later, never becoming clear-headed enough to explain what on earth had happened to him. To this day, nobody knows for sure. It was a perfectly Poe-like ending, a mystery that just endures forever.
So, we end right back where we began, with this question. As you get ready to read his work, remember it. Pay really close attention not just to what the narrator says, but how they say it. Look for the little clues they might be accidentally dropping about their own state of mind. Because in the world of Edgar Allan Poe, the most important story is often the one that's not being told out loud.